Hi, English 1201 students. This is your instructor, Song Fu, and I'm very honored to have Crystal Many Fingers to join us today. Today we will study and have a really nice discussion on Tom King's Borders. So the title of our lecture today is called The Indigenous Identity and Blackfoot History in Thomas King's Borders.
Interesting.
So the objective of our lecture today is that by the end of this lecture, you will have a good understanding of the important themes in Thomas King's Borders. A quick introduction to Thomas King as a wonderful native Canadian writer. He was born in Roseville, California in 1943. He immigrated to Canada in 1980. He taught at the University of Lethbridge in the early 1980s. His famous works include Medicine River, Green Grass Running Water, and The Inconvenient Indian. He was nominated for the Governor General's Award in 1992 and 1993. And Governor General's Award is almost like the highest honor, highest literary award in Canada. So he's a very established Indigenous writer, very famous, and I just love his writings. He's such a great storyteller and such a great writer.
Yes, he is very well. Yeah.
Okay. And so this is a picture of Thomas King, and I'm sure if you have read the short story, you probably noticed that Mrs. Many Fingers was referenced a few times in the short story. And then so here I want to have Crystal share as her connection to Thomas King. So how I think you know him personally,
Yes,
right?
yes, I do.
So what's your connection to King?
Well, when Tom moved from the United States and he was a first-time professor at the University of Lethbridge, he actually is Cherokee. And he was very proud of his Cherokee descent. And so when he began teaching at the University of Lethbridge, my mother was on the Senate at the University of Lethbridge. She had received an honorary degree, doctorate of law. So she was pretty high up there in the Senate. So she took him under her wing because he had just moved here. He was a newlywed. He had his wife was named Helen too. My mother's name was Helen Many Fingers, Dr. Helen Many Fingers. Anyway, so when I first started university and my brothers were there before me, they used to play basketball with Tom King. He's about 7 feet high. No, he's very tall. He's about
Is he really?
6'8", very tall.
Oh.
That's his book, Medicine River, is about basketball, if you read more about that. But he used to play basketball with my two brothers. And so they were on the same team. And then he started coming over to our house. And they always had that connection with the University of Lethbridge. So she adopted him. She took him as her own son because he was new to not only the Blackfoot territory, but he was new to Canada as well. So he was pretty much a household he was at our house a lot of the time. Yeah.
So like a really, really good friend and also almost like a family
Almost like
member.
a brother to me.
Yeah. Oh, wow.
He was my adopted brother.
Really?
Yeah.
So did you play basketball with them?
No, I sat on the sidelines. The boys were too rough. I didn't want to.
The boys were too rough.
They were way too rough. Yeah. So then when I started university in Lethbridge, which is where I started,
Yes.
I took a native literature class. I wasn't sure what I was going to study. I knew I wanted to be in the writing department because I'd like to write stories as well. And so I took his native literature class.
Oh, wow.
And that's when I said, I'm going to be a writer. I'm going to be a writer. I'm going to be the best writer in North America. And I'm going to write stories. And so it was because of Tom that I really got inspired to take that direction.
That's
The
wonderful.
story goes on, but yeah.
So you were in his class. So you took a class
I was in
with
his
him.
class, yeah. Yeah, and like we were pretty much fixtures at the University of Lethbridge. My mom was, she's a survivor of the residential schools, And then she took a job as a janitor in her young life. And then she herself said, I don't want to be a janitor my whole life.
Right.
So she enrolled at the University of Lethbridge when she was 58 years old
Wow.
and went on to get her teaching degree.
Uh-huh.
Like I said, then they gave her an honorary doctorate of law degree.
Wow.
And then she went on to receive the Order of Canada. I'll put that there for you to look at. I'll send you a shot of this as well. So
Okay.
this is the Mrs. Manyfingers that Tom King writes about in his story Borders.
Now, I know that Mrs. Manyfingers was referenced a few times in the short story. Was that short story real?
The story itself isn't real, but he based it on the characters. Like Letitia, when she moves to the Utah to get off the reserve because she wanted a better life for herself, is actually modeled after my sister Lois, Frank.
Oh my goodness.
Lois,
Yeah.
because she actually moved to Logan State and she attended university at Utah State University. And so him and my sister Lois had a kind of a love-hate relationship. They were like sister brothers and they
Yes.
were best friends and
Yeah.
they, but they were really close and they were good friends and they still are to this day. Yeah, we still keep in contact with Tom.
Well, and I'm sure all of you who are watching this video would agree with me that Tom King is such a good storyteller.
Yes.
When I was reading the short story, I mean, I believed him. I thought this whole thing really happened. He and his mother were trapped in this, in between these two borders, and I thought that actually happened. But maybe he imagined it, and maybe a lot of it was based on real events.
Real events,
Yeah.
Well, the fact that the border,
Yes.
the whole Blackfoot territory,
Yes.
our territory, and I think we have some maps to come up, extends right all the way north to Wetaskiwin, and then it goes all the way south to Yellowstone. And then it goes all the way east to Saskatchewan, and then west to the Rockies.
Right.
So we have a really huge territory. Now, prior to the establishment of the Confederation of Canada and the United States, there were no borders breaking up our Blackfeet territory because we were just crossed.
Yes.
And the whole irony behind the story is because a Blackfoot woman gets caught between two borders.
Yes.
Whereas prior to colonization, there were no borders.
Yeah.
We used to just travel, I still have cousins on the Blackfeet side. Yeah.
And then shows that borders are a man-made concept, and it's being established by, you can almost call that an ideology, right?
Yes.
And it established our national identity. But for indigenous people, such a border really doesn't exist.
No,
right?
no.
Yeah.
Yeah, there is such a thing called the Jade Treaty that applies to the Blackfoot people. The Mohawks in the east are in the same position because they have southern Mohawks that live in the state side and in the north as well, like us too. So we're one of the few First Nations that are separated by that border.
And on that note, I can't wait to show you the next slide because it's got a map of our Blackfoot Nation, right?
Sure.
Okay. So this is a little bit of a Blackfoot history. So Blackfoot Confederacy consists of the Siksika, the Blackfoot or the Blackfeet in the U.S., the Piikani, and the Kainai nations. As of 2018, the Siksika population is 7,497, with 4,095 people living on reserve in Alberta. So this gives you a kind of a rough idea about Blackfoot Confederacy. And then as Crystal mentioned earlier, so you can see that this is the Blackfoot, the Rockies, and then so part of it is in BC, and that's Alberta, Saskatchewan here, and then also Montana.
Yeah.
Is this
south.
also not Idaho? Okay.
Yeah, just the top part of Yellowstone is in southern Montana.
Right.
Yeah.
Okay. So I'm gonna look at the next slide, which probably has a couple other maps. So we're in Treaty 7, and I'm sure that some of you have heard that we're all Treaty 7 people.
Yes.
Yes. And so what that means is that we have Treaty 7 First Nations. So they are the Blackfoot Nation, Kainai, Piikani, Siksika, Stoney Nakoda nations, Tsuut'ina Nation. So we're in this area. Crystal, so could you kind of help us with where is Kainai Nation?
Sure.
Yeah.
My reserve is the Kainai Nation. I'm
Yes.
from the Kainai Nation. First of all, we are the largest land-based reserve in Canada. We have about 461 square miles. So we are the largest, and then the Kainai, the Piikani is down by Pincher Creek. If you know that area around Lundbrick, that's their area. And then the Siksika are on the west, or the east, sorry. And that's where they signed Treaty 7. So the Blackfoot, the Piikani, and the Siksika are all part of the Blackfoot Confederacy.
Oh, I see.
They, this is their territory. Against this city, Calgary is Calgary is in the heart of Blackfoot territory. Now, Stoney Nakoda and Tsuut'ina, they were included in the signing of Treaty 7. This isn't their home territory, and they will acknowledge that, but the Tsuut'ina they're Dene. They come from way up in the north and even way in the southern states. And the Stoney Nakoda are Sioux, and they come from the Lakotas, and Dakotas. So they emigrated up here, the Stonies, to the Rocky Mountains, where they situated their home base in what you would call Banff, Alberta now. But when the wealthy tourists started coming in, they became a nuisance because they were still hunting for game back in the day. And so Sir John A. Macdonald ordered them moved from where they were originally to where they are now. So they got really relocated. So yeah, the whole Treaty 7 was signed in 1877 at Blackfoot Crossing. It's a provincial national historical site, and it's about a 45-minute drive.
From Calgary.
From Calgary, yeah. And it's everybody's welcome, beautiful territory. Yeah, so and we're all Blackfoot speakers, except for Stoney and Tsuut'ina, they speak their own language.
So this is Calgary, and then so Kainai Nation.
Kainai's down by Lethbridge.
Oh, right.
Yeah.
In this area.
Yeah.
Okay. And that's where you came from.
That's where I come from.
Yeah.
And that's where Tom King actually started his career, teaching at the University of Lethbridge.
Nice. Okay. Now let's take a look at the next slide, and then we have some interesting passages from the short story that we want to share with you. This came from page 269 to 270. The border was actually two towns, though neither one was big enough to amount to anything. Coutts was on the Canadian side and consisted of a convenience store and gas station, a museum that was closed and boarded up, and a motel. Sweetgrass, which was on the American side, but all you could see was an overpass that arched across the highway and disappeared into the prairies. Just hearing the names of these towns, you would expect that Sweetgrass, which is a nice name and sounds like it is related to other places such as Medicine Hat and Moose Jaw and Kicking Horse Pass, will be on the Canadian side. And then you can kind of sense that, Tom King, the indigenous humor behind it. And that Coutts, which sounds abrupt and rude, would be on the American side, but this was not the case. So just to give you an idea about, what Tom King is referring to. So Sweetgrass, and then I got this from Google Maps. So Sweetgrass is here on the American side, and the Coutts will be on the Canadian side. So they were, so in the short story, so Tom King and then his mother were kind of caught here.
Yeah.
Right? And so about the names, Priscilla, the names are so interesting. We have Coutts, Sweetgrass, Medicine Hat, Moose Jaw, and Kicking Horse Pass. Any thoughts about these names?
The names that we have in our Blackfoot and Cree culture, because our Crees are our allies as well now.
Yes.
We have a lot of our traditional names. We use our traditional names. And so when they get interpreted into the how can I say it, Eurocentric language, they come out words like coots. So whereas ours, it's the literal meaning. So sweetgrass is probably named that because there's sweetgrass there.
Oh,
And sweetgrass is what we burn for in our ceremonies. It cleanses the aura, it creates positive eons in the air. We use it for pipe ceremonies. Sweetgrass is very spiritual
right.
to our people. So that the meaning and probably the reason why Tom used the word sweetgrass
Yes.
is because it does have such a spiritual significance and it brings irony into the story. Like he's saying, sweetgrass should have been on the Canadian side and coots, which sounds really colonial, should have been on the American side. And I think that's the whole point he's making.
Yes.
And so when we talk about moose jaw, there's probably moose in the bush and Peking Horse Pass. That's in BC, right? Even here in Calgary, we have Deerfoot Trail,
Yes.
Blackfoot Trail,
Yes.
Sarcee Trail. Now we have Métis Trail, and now the new ring road is Stony Trail. So those areas of geographical significance are really, really important to us because you learn off the land.
Right.
And when you know what the land means, because it's been there forever and ever, it really has significant meaning to us and to people, and that's why we try to share these stories with you. So if you go up to Nose Hill, you'll see the medicine wheel at the top that the Blackfoot elders put up there.
Yes.
And it really means a lot, and we're always asking people if you want to come and learn.
Yes.
Canada Day powwow is going to be coming up soon, and that
Yes.
would be an excellent opportunity to come on and learn more. But I think that's what Tom meant was by he switched, those are actually, coots is actually on the Canadian side,
Yeah,
and that
yes.
sounds really colonial, and sweetgrass is on the American side. But there's still Blackfeet. Sweetgrass is still Blackfoot.
Yeah.
Don't ask me why they call us Blackfoot on Canadian side and then Blackfeet down there. We still don't. We don't. It's government. It's the
Yes.
way the colonizers wrote
Yeah.
that up. So
Yes.
that'd be a good research project.
It
though.
might be. Yeah. And then for you, it's it's the same thing. Right?
It's the same thing.
It's the same
Yeah,
thing.
that border broke up families. It broke
Yes.
up cousins. It broke up a lot of. It's just like you can't, and then we can't just really pass now anymore.
No.
Especially these days.
Yes.
Before we could just drive across back in those days, but now you have to have a passport.
Yeah.
You can't just go across like the way we used
Yeah.
to.
So it's almost like the government is imposing this national identity
Yeah.
on indigenous people.
Yeah.
Right.
Mm.
And that's what Tom King is really
Mhm.
trying to show that this is very problematic.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And this is why she had the identity. She refused to admit she was a Canadian citizen, and some of our elders still will not admit that they're Canadians. They will say, "I'm Blackfoot," because Blackfoot is a nation just as much as Canada. A lot of First Nations, they are little countries, and that's why we call them First Nations.
Right.
So they will say, "I'm not Black," or "I'm not American,"
Yes.
"I'm not Canadian," "I'm Blackfoot," or "I'm Cree," or "I'm Mohawk." So that's the identity that they take.
Yeah.
And that's a really big meaning in this story.
And I think if you're watching this video, we can all probably agree in a certain way that we sometimes take our identity for granted.
Yes.
Right, we're Canadians, but for indigenous people, some people they still think that we are Blackfoot,
Mhm,
right?
mhm.
And so when that identity is being taken away or not being acknowledged, it's very, very troublesome.
Yeah,
It's a big problem.
And especially if you think, because our people have been here since time immemorial,
Absolutely.
and
Yes.
Canada's only confederated
Yes.
151 years
Yeah.
ago. So that's,
Yeah.
and now we're just having to take on their identity
Yes.
being forced on us.
Yes. Okay. Thank you, Crystal. So take a look at the next slide. Okay,
Okay.
so this is a really interesting kind of a dialogue between the border officer and the mother, right? And so I'm gonna do a little bit of role play. And of course, Crystal is gonna be the mother, and then I'll be the officer. So, morning, ma'am.
Good morning.
Any firearms or tobacco?
No.
Citizenship?
Blackfoot.
He told us to sit in the car and wait, and we did. In about 5 minutes, another guard came out with the first man. They were talking as they came, both men swaying back and forth like two cowboys headed for a bar and a gunfight. Wow. Morning, man.
Good morning.
Cecile tells me you and the boy are Blackfoot.
That's right.
Now I know that we got Blackfeet on the American side, and then the Canadians got Blackfeet on their side, just so we can keep our records straight. What side do you come from?
I knew exactly what my mother was going to say, and I could have told them if they had asked me.
Canadian side or the American side?
Blackfoot side.
Okay. Next slide, please. So, Canadian side or American side, asked the guard. Blackfoot side, she said. So, just from this short dialogue, you can see that Thomas King and his mother are crossing these national boundaries.
Man-made borders.
They're man-made
Man-made
borders,
borders.
and then borders are kind of a man-made concept,
Yes.
right?
Yes.
It's an ideology, it's a way to establish our national identity. But once again, for indigenous people, that can be very, very problematic.
Yeah.
So when she answers Blackfoot side, so this answer, of course, is like a surprise to the border guard. And then it is beyond the binaries, so it's neither Canadian nor American. And then being indigenous or being Blackfoot is almost like this third identity or the third answer that Tom King is having our readers think about. Right?
Yes.
And the American border officer says to the mother, everyone who crosses our border has to declare their citizenship, even Americans. It helps us keep track of the visitors we get from the various countries.
Yeah. Again, that's even ironic, right? He's saying, you're our visitor. And actually, we were here first. So I thought that was humor.
Yes, yeah. It's ironic, but at the same time, it reflects the kind of the
Yes.
problem and also the history.
The mentality.
Yes.
Yeah.
Like, what do you mean visitors? We live here, right?
Yeah, this is our territory.
This is our territory, right?
Border guards.
And then the next slide. I thought we were going home, but she turned the car around and drove back towards the American border. Instead, she pulled into the parking lot of the duty-free store and stopped. Most of that day, we wandered around the duty-free store, which wasn't very large. I told the manager we had nowhere to go, that neither the Americans nor the Canadians would let us in. So once again, you see this problem, almost or if you want, the politics, right? The national space versus the in-between space. And then what makes this really ironic is that, Thomas King and his mother in the short story are caught in between these two borders. It's almost like, they're caught in between, this in-between space is, very, very compartmentalized. It's such a small space, and then that belongs to the indigenous people.
Yeah.
They're caught in that space. And the problem is, this shouldn't have been the case at all. It's their territory. It's Blackfoot territory. And then you see this indigenous identity and then also the in-between. Their identity or their history is not being acknowledged. And what makes this passage really, really interesting is also this in-between space. You have this duty-free store. Right.
Yes, yeah.
Yeah, the space being commercialized, right?
We call that no man's land, in between the two borders.
Yeah.
And Tom King, when he lived in Lethbridge, Coots is not even an hour southeast of Lethbridge. So we had a lot of opportunity to go into the States and drive into Great Falls, Cutbank, Montana, Browning by Cardston, Kalispell, which is my favorite place to go. And so he would have had that opportunity to see what the duty-free shop is.
Right.
Because like at the airport, it's a non-tax place.
Right.
You can buy, cheap goods there, and then I think they ended up sleeping there for 3 nights or something.
Yes, in the
Yeah,
short
it's
story.
been a while since I read it, but so really, the poor kid was living off pop and chips until somebody took a stand and said,
Yeah.
let's let these people through.
Yeah, the reporters campaign. Right?
Yeah.
But once again, remember this is Tom King imagined it.
Imagining
Yes.
that.
Okay.
Based
So this
on true people, but
yes, probably he imagined the whole thing. Okay.
Yeah.
This is fictional. All right. Okay, so I'm going to have Crystal share this passage with us. This is quite symbolic, the significance of storytelling.
So I can read it. I guess I'll tell a little bit.
Yes.
So it says, "You see all those stars?" She said. "When I was a little girl, my grandmother used to take me and my sisters out on the prairies and tell the stories about all the stars. Do you think Mel's going to bring us any hamburgers?" That's all a kid cares is to eat, right?
Yeah.
Every one of those stars has a story. You see that bunch of stars over there that looks like a fish? He didn't say no. Coyote went fishing one day. That's how it all started. We sat out under the stars that night, and my mother told me all sorts of stories. She was serious about it too. She'd tell them slow, repeating parts as she went, as if she expected me to remember each one. Well, in our culture, in our history, our ancestry, the two wolf-like beings came down from the Magoyi Trail, which is Blackfoot for the Milky Way. It's the wolf trail. And they taught our people how to hunt, how to use the buffalo, how to survive. And they told us, you don't eat anything with paws or claws. You eat animals that have hoofs, and so the buffalo, that was really the big lesson they taught us. And so our ancestry comes from the stars. So when we look up into the stars, we can see constellations, and they mean a lot to us. We have Nadosi is the sun, and that's who we ask for assistance. He's not our creator's our creator, but we thank Nadosi for rising up.
Right.
And so the stars mean a lot in our Blackfoot and Cree Celestial, because our people came from there. And you can read stories about the Magoyi Trail. I can send you a link on that. There's elders tell a really good story about that. And it should be told in Blackfoot and translated into English, because it just means a lot as another language would, right?
Yeah.
Yeah.
So you want to actually listen to the story in its original language.
Exactly.
Right?
Yeah.
And you want to hear that sound, to hear the language.
Yeah.
Yeah. That would be really,
Yeah.
powerful.
It would.
Yeah.
It is very.
Okay.
And oral storytelling is a way that we teach our young people.
Yes.
So Napi was our trickster, and he roamed all over the world, and he was always getting into trouble, and he was always with the animals. There's another story where he was floating on a big water, and he was with the otters and the beavers, and there was some other animals. They were trying to find land, and the only one, some of the beavers, they tried to go down as far as they could and bring something back up, and they drowned because they couldn't get down that far. The only one that could was the otter. And so he made it all the way down, and he grabbed some dirt and he made it back up, and he showed Napi, who was floating on a raft. And so that's how they knew that there was land underneath.
Oh.
So it's kind of like similar to the Noah story. A lot of our indigenous creation stories come from the floods, which is really interesting. So
That's fascinating. I mean, in Tom King's story, this coyote went fishing. That's all everything started. I mean, that's
part of that.
beautiful.
Yeah. And Coyote is the trickster.
Coyote is.
In the Anishinaabe, in the Cree, Coyote is the trickster. He's always in trouble, but we learn from him. And he's on Wonder Woman, the movie.
Oh, is he?
Yeah.
Oh,
Yeah.
okay. All right.
Yeah.
Thank you for sharing that with
That
us.
was awesome.
Now, this is the end of the short story, kind of the last paragraph. And then I found that very, very powerful. It was almost evening when we left Coots. I watched the border through the rear window until all you could see were the tops of the flagpoles and the blue water tower, and then they rode over a hill and disappeared. Now, Tom King wrote this short story from the perspective of a young boy, and so it's at the end of the short story, it's almost reflecting on this experience, right? And then that played an important role in this, in his mental growth, or his awareness of his indigenous identity. So I think that this whole thing here, if you look at this line, they rolled over a hill and disappeared. It's just very poetic.
Very
right?
poetic.
Yes. Such a great writer.
Yeah, he is. And the whole, all we could see was the tops of the flag poles and the man-made stuff.
Right.
But what covers them is the rolling hills. So they get drowned out.
Right.
And he gets to go, and they did get across the border.
Yes.
They did actually make it across. So all that is closure. It's an end to this. And that's where Tom King's such a brilliant writer,
Right.
that, it leaves it open. There is actually a CBC production of Borders
Right.
that was done back in the 80s. That it's a 4-part miniseries, and Borders was highlighted in that. I've been trying to search for that because I'm in it. I was one of the card players at the beginning of the story. They filmed it on our reserve. But yeah, I'll try to find that for you in the future.
Okay.
So, cool.
So now that we learned Crystal used to be a superstar,
Long
movie
time
star.
ago.
Now that just adds another layer
Yeah,
to the short story, right?
next sequel we'll talk
Yeah,
about.
yeah, in our next lecture, right? Stay tuned.
Stay tuned.
And of course, we want to leave you with a question to think about. So why is it indicated a few times in the story that life on the reserve is boring and going to Salt Lake City is exciting for Letitia? So what problems are being implied? So this is just a question for you to think about. As almost like a study question. So if you could, you can share your thoughts on the discussion board. That would be wonderful. Or you can just think about these two questions, and then maybe these questions can help you have a deeper appreciation or understanding of the short story.
Thank you.
All right, then so we're gonna end our lecture with this really beautiful picture. Yeah. So we have these elders in Blackfoot. This is like.
Yeah.
It's almost like a ceremony. Right?
Yeah.
Yeah.
It looks like a grand entry.
Yeah. Okay.
With the chiefs and the flags representing different First Nations.
Yes.
This is a really very regal. They look like royalty because they're chiefs.
Okay.
And so I'm really glad you. Don't
a-
forget to come to Canada Day powwow.
Okay.
And that's actually at the Indian Village Calgary Stampede. So that is all the Treaty 7 chiefs right there. So yeah, if you'll see them, come out, learn more. We really, really encourage you to do that.
Okay, this is the end of our lecture. I hope you enjoyed it, and we'll see you next time. Bye-bye.
Stay tuned.